Sir, room key. Now, you don't look like you're staying here.
Don't look like it based on what? I'm a paying guest sitting at a bar.
Stand up. Security's on the way. Don't make this difficult.
Am I being detained? State the legal basis.
The bar was quiet in the way expensive places always are. Low amber light reflected off polished wood ice cracked slowly inside crystal glasses, and a muted jazz track drifted through hidden speakers. It was just after 9 in the evening, rain tapping softly against the tall windows of the hotel lounge. A black man sat alone on a leather stool jacket folded neatly beside him, one hand resting on the bar, the other loosely holding his phone. He looked like someone waiting, not hiding, not rushed. The bartender slid a glass toward him, a single pour of whiskey. The man nodded in thanks, eyes briefly meeting the bartender's before drifting back to the room. Conversations hummed quietly around him. Laughter from a couple near the window, the clink of cutlery from the dining area behind the bar. Then a shadow fell across the counter. "Sir, are you a guest at this hotel?" The voice was firm, practiced. The man turned his head. A uniformed police officer stood a few feet away, arms crossed, posture stiff. Off duty, maybe, but still carrying the authority like a second skin. "Yes," the man replied calmly. "I am." The officer did not move. He glanced at the empty seat beside the man, then at the glass of whiskey. "Do you have a room key or some identification to prove that?" The man raised an eyebrow, not in anger, but in surprise. "I am meeting someone here. I am allowed to sit at a bar, aren't I?" A few heads nearby turned. The bartender froze, cloth and hand eyes flicking between them. The officer exhaled sharply. "We've had issues with people wandering in off the street. You don't look like you're staying here." The sentence landed heavy. The room seemed to quiet as if the music had been turned down a notch. The man straightened slightly on his stool. "I don't look like it," he repeated, choosing each word carefully. "Based on what?" Instead of answering, the officer stepped back and reached for his phone. "I'm calling hotel security," he said. "Let them sort this out." The bartender finally spoke. "Officer, he hasn't caused any trouble." The officer ignored him. Two guests pulled out their phones. A woman near the corner whispered to her companion, "This feels wrong." The man at the bar did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He simply watched as the officer spoke quietly into the phone, eyes fixed on him as if daring him to react. Within moments, the tension thickened. What began as a simple question had become an accusation. A quiet drink had turned into a public judgment. And in that instant, surrounded by polished wood and soft music, a familiar American ritual was unfolding again. A man being asked to prove he belonged, not because of what he did, but because of who he was. The story pauses, but the room does not disappear. The bartender keeps wiping the same spot on the counter. The officer stands near the entrance, phone in hand. The man on the stool breathes slowly, and then the timeline begins to rewind. Years earlier, long before the hotel bar, long before the badge on the officer's belt mattered to him, the man had grown up on the south side of Chicago. A brick apartment building with a broken elevator sirens at night and a mother who worked double shifts as a nurse. His father left early. Not dramatically, just slowly. Fewer dinners, fewer words, then none at all. Responsibility arrived before childhood ended. He learned early how to stay quiet in public spaces, how to keep his hands visible, how to speak carefully. In high school, teachers told him he was sharp, but guidance counselors suggested practical paths. Community college, trade work, something realistic. He ignored them. He studied at night. Scholarships paid for books. A partial academic grant got him into a state university. He worked campus security to cover rent. Law school came later. Top of his class. Moot court awards. Professors noticed how methodical he was, how he listened more than he spoke, how he never wasted words. After graduation, he joined the U.S. Attorney's Office. Long hours, low pay, high stakes. He prosecuted drug cases at first, then public corruption. Police officers who planted evidence, city officials who took bribes. He never raised his voice in court. He let facts do the damage. Over the years, he earned a reputation. Fair, relentless, unimpressed by uniforms. When the Department of Justice created a new oversight division focused on civil rights violations and law enforcement accountability, his name rose quickly. Not because he was loud, because he was precise. By 45, he was appointed a director. A title that carried weight in Washington even if it meant nothing in a hotel bar at night. While his path climbed steadily upward, the officer's path followed a different rhythm. The officer grew up in a small town 2 states away. Football, pickup trucks, a family where authority was never questioned. His father had been a corrections officer. Dinner conversations were about order, control, respect. When people stepped out of line, consequences followed. That was the logic. Clean, simple. He joined the police academy at 21. Did well enough. Not exceptional. Not terrible. On the street, he learned fast what earned approval. Being decisive. Being firm. Not hesitating. Complaints came early. A rough stop. A heated exchange. Each one closed quietly. Not sustained. Counseling recommended. Training completed. He learned that nothing really happened when nothing really happened. Over time, his instincts hardened. Certain neighborhoods meant trouble. Certain faces meant questions. He told himself it was experience, pattern recognition. He never called it bias. Supervisors described him as proactive, aggressive when necessary, the kind of officer who took control of a scene. Off duty, he still carried that posture, the scanning eyes, the squared shoulders. In public spaces, he noticed who looked like they belonged and who did not, or at least who he thought did not. That night at the hotel bar, both men carried their histories with them. One carried decades of restraint learned for survival. The other carried years of authority rarely challenged. They had never met before. But the collision had been inevitable long before the whiskey was poured. Back in the present hotel, security was on the way. The officer shifted his weight, glancing around, suddenly aware of the phones pointed in his direction. The man at the bar lifted his glass, took a slow sip, and waited. Not because he was powerless, but because he knew exactly how much power was about to be tested. Hotel security arrived quietly, 2 men in dark suits moving with practiced neutrality. One stood near the entrance, the other approached the bar. Their eyes took in the scene fast. The officer, the man on the stool. The phones raised just high enough to record without being obvious. "Sir," the taller guard said to the man at the bar, "we've had a concern raised. Are you staying at the hotel?" The man reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately. He placed a room key on the counter. Then his driver's license. Then a government-issued ID, face-down thumb resting lightly on the corner. "I am a registered guest," he said, "and I was invited to meet a colleague here." The guard glanced at the documents. Everything checked out in seconds. He nodded slightly, already ready to end it, but the officer stepped in closer. "That doesn't explain why you're loitering alone," he said. "Guests usually don't sit here by themselves." A murmur rippled through the room. Someone scoffed. A woman near the window shook her head and kept filming. The man turned fully now, meeting the officer's eyes for the first time. "I'm having a drink," he said. "Alone. Like half the people in this room." He gestured subtly. A white man scrolling his phone. A woman nursing a martini. No one questioned them. The officer's jaw tightened. He felt it. The eyes. The attention. Backing down now meant admitting he'd been wrong. He pointed at the ID on the bar. "What agency is that?" The man slid it forward, face up. "Department of Justice." The officer barely glanced at it. "Anyone can fake an ID," he said. "I need to verify who you are." The security guard hesitated. "Officer, everything seems in order." The officer ignored him. He turned to the man. "Stand up for me." The room went still. The bartender stopped moving entirely. Glasses untouched. Music still playing, but no one heard it anymore. "Am I being detained?" the man asked. "Yes," the officer said too quickly. "For investigation." "Investigation of what?" "Suspicious behavior." The man nodded once. Then he spoke clearly, loud enough for every phone in the room to capture it. "I have provided identification. I am a registered guest. I am not breaking any law. If you are detaining me, state the legal basis." The officer's face flushed. "Don't argue with me." "I'm not arguing, I'm documenting." A man from the crowd spoke up. "He hasn't done anything." Another voice followed. "Why are you bothering him?" The officer raised his voice. "Step back, everyone." The security guards exchanged a look. This was no longer routine. The officer leaned closer to the man. "Last chance. Stand up." The man did. Slowly. Calmly. He placed his hands on the bar palms visible. "I am complying," he said. "And I want it noted that I am complying." The officer reached for his radio. His hand hesitated. For the first time, doubt crept in. Not enough to stop him. Just enough to make the moment dangerous. Because when authority meets an audience, ego often speaks louder than reason. And every camera in that room was now rolling. The officer moved first. Not fast, not violently. Just deliberate enough to make the point clear. His hand closed around the man's upper arm. Fingers firm, pressure applied. Not enough to bruise yet, enough to control. "Sir, you need to step away from the bar." The man felt the grip before he looked down at it. The texture of the uniform sleeve against his skin. The weight of a decision being made without him. He inhaled once through his nose and nodded. "I am moving," he said, slowly. The officer guided him forward. Chairs scraped against the floor as people shifted to get out of the way. A phone camera caught the angle of the officer's hand tightening, knuckles whitening. Another caught the man's face. Calm. Focused. Jaw set, but eyes steady. As they reached the open space near the hallway, the officer stopped. "Turn around." The room collectively held its breath. The man paused. He knew this moment. The one where resistance would be written later as justification. He turned facing the bar again, hands relaxed at his sides. "Place your hands behind your back." "For what reason?" the man asked. The officer did not answer. He reached for his cuffs. The sound cut through the room. Metal sliding. The soft click as one cuff closed around the wrist. Cold, sudden, final. Someone gasped. The second cuff snapped shut. Too tight. The man's shoulders shifted instinctively, then stilled. "I am not resisting," he said evenly. The officer pulled him a half step forward. "Let's go." The walk toward the service corridor felt longer than it was. Every step echoed. Shoes on marble. Phones tracking every movement. The bartender's eyes followed them wide and helpless. A guest whispered, "This is insane." Inside the corridor, the lighting was harsher, white, clinical. The music from the bar faded, replaced by the hum of ventilation and the officer's breathing. The man stared straight ahead. His mind was already moving. Fourth Amendment. Unlawful detention. False arrest. Witnesses. Video evidence. Names. Timestamps. He cataloged everything with the same precision he used in courtrooms. Behind him, the officer's confidence began to crack. Not visibly, internally. The silence pressed in. No resistance. No shouting. No chaos to justify escalation. Just compliance. And cameras. They reached a small security office. A desk. 2 chairs. A wall monitor showing camera feeds. The officer removed one cuff and pushed the man into a chair. "Sit." The man sat. He rolled his wrist once, testing circulation. Red marks were already forming. The officer stepped back, suddenly aware of the space. He avoided eye contact. "What's your full name?" he asked. The man looked up. His voice did not change. "You should verify my identification before we go any further." The officer hesitated. He glanced at the door, at the camera in the corner, at the phone vibrating in his pocket. For the first time that night, uncertainty crept into the room, because the injustice had already happened, and now the consequences were quietly lining up behind it. The door opened without urgency. A man in a dark suit stepped inside hotel management by the look of him. Mid-50s, gray at the temples. The kind of posture shaped by decades of smoothing over problems quietly. He glanced at the handcuffs, then at the officer, then at the man seated calmly in the chair. "What's going on here?" he asked. The officer spoke first. "We had a suspicious individual at the bar. He refused to cooperate." The man in the chair lifted his eyes. "I complied fully," he said. "I provided identification. I am a registered guest. I was detained anyway." The manager turned to the officer. "Did you verify his ID?" The officer hesitated. "I was in the process of doing that." The manager sighed and reached for the ID still lying on the desk. He picked it up, adjusted his glasses, and froze. He looked again, slower this time. "Department of Justice." He swallowed. His eyes moved to the seal, then the name, then the title beneath it. Director. The room changed temperature, not physically, emotionally, like air leaving a sealed space. The manager's voice dropped. "Sir?" He said to the man in the chair, "I sincerely apologize for this inconvenience." The officer stiffened. "Inconvenience." The manager looked at him sharply. "You detained a senior federal official in my hotel." The officer's mouth opened, then closed. He reached for his phone. "I need to call this in." "You should," the man said quietly. "And you should do it now." The officer dialed. His tone was different this time. Lower, controlled, but strained. He spoke in fragments. "DOJ, Director level." "Yes." "At the hotel." Seconds stretched. The man watched the officer's reflection in the dark monitor screen. The squared shoulders had softened. The certainty drained away, replaced by calculation and fear. The call ended. The officer did not speak immediately. He looked at the man in the chair, finally seeing him clearly. Not as a presence that didn't belong, but as someone who could dismantle careers with paperwork. Sir, the officer said I was unaware of your position. That is not the issue, the man replied. You were unaware of your limits. The manager shifted uncomfortably. The security guards avoided eye contact. The officer unlocked the remaining cuff. It fell open with a soft clink. You are free to go, he said. The man stood rolling his shoulders once. He adjusted his jacket. His voice remained steady. This interaction will be documented. There is video, there are witnesses. I expect a full report, including names, timestamps, and justification for my detention. The officer nodded too quickly. Yes, of course. The man turned toward the door, then paused. He looked back once. You assumed I did not belong, he said. Tonight you learned what happens when assumptions replace law. He walked out of the room without another word. Behind him, the officer stood frozen. The manager stared at the closed door. Somewhere in the hotel, the bar music continued, unaware that a quiet reckoning had just begun. By morning, the story was already moving faster than anyone in that hotel could contain. A guest had uploaded a 30-second clip. Not dramatic, no shouting, just a calm black man in a suit, hands cuffed behind his back, an officer's voice off camera, and a caption that read, "This happened last night at a luxury hotel. He did nothing wrong." By noon, the clip had millions of views. Another angle surfaced. Then another. The moment the cuffs closed. The moment the officer dismissed the ID. The slow walk toward the corridor. The comment sections filled with the same words over and over. Profiling. Abuse. How many times does this have to happen? News outlets made calls, not to the hotel, not to the police department, to Washington. By mid-afternoon, the Department of Justice confirmed the identity. The man was not just a director. He was the director responsible for reviewing civil rights violations involving law enforcement agencies nationwide. The irony was not lost on anyone. A formal complaint was filed within 48 hours. Not emotional, not theatrical, 23 pages, precise language, constitutional citations, Fourth Amendment violations, unlawful detention, false imprisonment, abuse of authority under color of law. The officer was named individually. The city was named. The hotel was named. Internal Affairs opened an investigation immediately. Body camera footage was pulled. Dispatch logs reviewed. The officer's history was re-examined with fresh eyes. The pattern was impossible to ignore this time. Multiple prior complaints. Similar language. Suspicious person. Failed to de-escalate. No sustained findings. No discipline beyond retraining. A paper trail of missed warnings. The officer was placed on administrative leave. Badge surrendered. Weapon logged. His name removed from the schedule. At home, he watched the footage replayed on cable news. Experts breaking down each mistake. Former prosecutors explaining exactly why qualified immunity would not apply. The hotel issued a statement. Carefully worded, regretful, neutral. It did not help. Corporate partners distanced themselves. Conferences were quietly relocated. Reservations canceled. Protesters gathered outside within days. Not loud, not chaotic. Just signs, cameras, questions. The city moved to settle quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. Video, witnesses, admissions. The settlement number was never announced publicly, but sources confirmed it was substantial. Enough to make a statement. The officer was terminated before the ink dried. Not allowed to resign. Terminated for cause. His certification was flagged. Appeals denied. His law enforcement career ended the same way the encounter began. Quietly, but decisively. The director declined interviews. He issued one statement through counsel. Calm, direct. This case is not about who I am. It is about what happens to people who do not have my position. Accountability is not punishment. It is correction. Policy changes followed. Mandatory verification protocols, revised training. Body camera activation rules tightened, oversight expanded, none of it framed as a reaction, all of it framed as reform long overdue. The videos remained online, shared in classrooms, used in training sessions, watched by millions who recognized the situation instantly. A man sitting at a bar, asked to prove he belonged, escalation without cause, authority unchecked. Until it wasn't. Justice did not arrive with sirens or speeches. It arrived with documentation and consequences. What happened in that hotel was not complicated. It did not require advanced legal theory to understand. The law was already clear long before the cuffs came out. In the United States, a person sitting quietly in a public or semi-public space is not suspicious by default. The Fourth Amendment requires reasonable and articulable suspicion of a specific crime before detention. Not a feeling, not discomfort, not an assumption. Suspicion must be based on observable facts. None existed that night. Refusing to leave a place where you are lawfully present is not a crime. Sitting alone is not a crime. Asking why you are being questioned is not obstruction. Asserting your rights is not resistance. Courts have ruled on this repeatedly. The problem is not a lack of law. It is a lack of restraint. This case also exposes how bias operates without announcing itself. The officer never used a slur. He never shouted. He never struck anyone. Yet the bias was unmistakable. It appeared in the first question, "Are you a guest here?" It deepened with the second, "You don't look like you belong." Bias often hides behind tone and procedure. It presents itself as professionalism. Psychologically, the moment authority feels challenged, ego takes over. Instead of reassessing, the officer escalated. Not because of danger, but because backing down would mean admitting error in front of an audience. That is where most unlawful detentions begin. Pride, not threat. For viewers watching this, the lesson is practical. If you are questioned in public, stay calm. Keep your hands visible. Ask if you are being detained. Ask for the legal basis. Do not argue emotionally. Document if you can. If others are recording, let them. If you are detained, comply physically but not verbally beyond what is required. Say clearly that you do not consent and that you are complying under protest. Most importantly, understand that dignity is not granted by uniforms or titles. It is protected by law, but only if people insist on it being enforced. This story feels shocking because of who the man was, but the truth is simpler and more uncomfortable. The same thing happens every day to people without credentials, without cameras, without legal knowledge. The difference is not the behavior. The difference is visibility. So ask yourself this. If power had not been revealed, would accountability have followed? If the cameras were not there, would the outcome have changed? Because justice should not depend on who you are. It should depend on what is right.